And hello to everybody. I really appreciate the opportunity just to be amongst business women in our community. A little bit of additional information. I'm based in Sydney's Hills area and have been here for the last 25 years, but I actually grew up in Ryde. So I began my life in Meadowbank, and so spent quite a bit of time in the inner west as a part of my earlier years before we moved out here as a late teenager. So I've always had a bit of a love for the inner west and the central part of Sydney, because it's sort of my homeland, if you like. Today we're going to cover really how do we make sure that we're reopen ready. There's so much that is swirling around of information. There's so many changes that have been happening really quickly that it can be a little bit difficult to grab a moment to make sure that you've actually covered everything you need to think about. And today is really about looking at all the various aspects of a business and the things you should be asking yourself to make sure that you are reopen ready. And even though we've kind of reopened about a week ago, there's a lot more reopening activities that are going to happen over the next few months and coming into the new year. So I'll share my screen and just pop up our PowerPoint presentation for today, because we all love a good PowerPoint, but I do promise it won't be death by PowerPoint. So just make sure it's actually going to share. Can you guys all see that okay? Yeah. Fantastic. Okay, so really the short topic name for this is, are you reopen ready? And the most important thing is knowing, are you fully prepared for this? And I'm really glad we've got a big cross-section of businesses and businesses types in the room, because you're going to see that we touch on a lot of these types of businesses as really important to your reopening strategy for the year ahead. So we're going to cover a little bit of information about your ability to deliver cash flow, some of the new costs of doing business, your product and service profitability, marketing strategies, compliance and risk. And then we're going to get into things like people management and the mental health aspects that we need to think about as businesses. Now, Tiz mentioned that there is a detailed checklist which we've created for today to be able to share with you. So we're going to touch on some of those questions as a part of the discussion today, but we've got a whole bunch of other questions that drill down into some of these more deeply, which you'll be able to see in that checklist. If you do have any questions along the way, pop them into the chat box, and then if I see them pop up and I know that we're going to cover them, I'll tackle that later on, and you'll see that we've already covered your question. If there's anything you come up with as a question throughout our discussion today that we haven't covered, then we'll circle back to it and make sure that we cover all of that off for you. And again, after today's session, if there are any further questions, then by all means you can touch base with us through Tiz or through the Inner West Council, and we'd be happy to assist you where we can. So Tiz has already given a wonderful intro, so I don't need to go into much detail about me and who I am. I have very deliberately today chosen to have a natural background. I'm sitting in my business centre today because I'm sick of the fake backgrounds and feeling like I'm a bobbling head. I'd rather be physically with you if I could. But a little bit of information about making sure that you are able to succeed. So when we think about a checklist, a great way to use a checklist is really to use that to work through the different aspects of your business. Everything we're putting on the checklist are things that don't require massive amounts of work. They're just questions to ask yourself to determine, have I covered this off as a part of my process of planning and reopening? Some of them might require you to go and talk to your bookkeeper, your accountant, your IT person, or a legal representative. So if that's the case, I'll mention that is something you want to take to them as a question to answer. But the key we're looking for here is not to stunt growth, but to support growth in your business this year. I have to say that the COVID pandemic, whilst it's been an awful, awful thing, both locally and globally for individuals as well as businesses, it has forced business owners to become better business owners. So for that, it's actually a great thing. So we don't want to lose all those lessons that we have the opportunity to learn through this. I always say every day is a pandemic in my business, because really anything significant could go wrong at any point in time. If I'm not prepared for that, if I'm not willing to pivot or move quickly, I probably shouldn't be in business, because it's never going to be smooth sailing. So if we can take some of those lessons learned and build a much more robust and productive and profitable business in the year ahead, then we've really all learned something fantastic out of this. Or it might be a new business idea you've come up with and you're starting out in the right way, thinking and planning instead of a scattergun approach, which is how most businesses generally do start. So this is one of my favourite sayings, and I really hope this is something you'll take away from today, because this is really what it's all about. And it's the quote from Abraham Lincoln where he says, "If I had 8 hours to chop down a tree, I would spend 6 hours sharpening my axe." So everything that we're looking at today is about sharpening your axe, ready to act, ready to implement. If we don't attend to these details, if we don't answer these questions for ourselves, then we end up spending a lot more time, energy, and money on things which we could have dealt with really quickly by just spending a couple of minutes thinking them through. So let's talk about your ability to deliver. Some of the questions you need to ask yourself now about your product, about your service, about your business operation. Will you be able to deliver the same offerings in the year ahead? Or do you think that there's a risk that some of them may not be possible? Why might that be? Now, a lot of businesses may have pivoted in the last year and created solutions to address temporary problems or temporary shortages. Is it possible that those will need to continue or that they will drop off? And I love the example that was mentioned by Margot, that she's all of a sudden been able to do a whole lot more by Zoom. It's opened up a whole new market to her. But the reality is, are people going to want to do this by Zoom in the year ahead? Or only a very small portion or a certain part of her audience may be interested in that, and the rest are going to want to have a face-to-face offering again. If you had to deliver this in person or at the same rate or the same volume, is it achievable to do that? So a couple of detailed questions that we should consider is, have the costs actually changed? Has there been an impact to the supply chain of delivering for you? Now, this is not just a product business issue, supply chain. Services are also impacted by supply chain. If you can't rely on the same people who were providing parts of your service, if it was in a subcontracted format, or maybe it was, an IT person, a graphic designer who's now gone on to take another job because they couldn't afford to keep their business running during COVID, you might think they're there ready to go when you are, and all of a sudden they're not. So you might need to do some checks. How is my supply chain looking? Is everybody capable of doing what we need to do this year? I want to ramp up, but are they in a position where they can support me in that? The cost side of things is really important. We're going to touch on that when we look at cash flow and cost changes shortly. A big issue that a lot of businesses are facing, and we don't necessarily understand completely the impact of this yet, is the risks around unavailable materials. We know there's a staff skills shortage. Okay, but how long is that likely to go on for? What kind of impact will that have on your business? Well, there's a couple of impacts it'll have. One, you don't have the people to do the work here. Two, what people you do have available are probably going to cost you more. There's a definite increase in price required then. So are there any elements of your service or your product that may get delayed or may get halted? We recently had a strike with the DHL delivery team. So if you've got an e-commerce business and you're reliant on DHL delivering within, 24-hour turnaround, and that's what you're promising your customers, but there could be some risks associated with restrictions. Have we factored this in? How are we going to communicate that? So is there anything you're going to need to do to rationalise your products and services? Are they actually all profitable? Are they all deliverable? And if they're not, then you may need to go back and have a look at what you're offering, whether you're a service-based business, consulting, or whether you're a product-based business, and decide what are the priority products and services that are actually going to be achievably delivered over the next 3, 6, and 12 months, and become more and more conscious of some of these changes that are occurring. One of the most important things I think every business owner needs to have as a strategy is how you're going to proactively communicate over the next 3 to 6 months with your customers to help them understand these conditions and adjust their expectations. There's actually a blog post we're putting together at the moment, and it is about how consumers need to start expecting that they're going to probably pay between 10 to 20% more for everything. And as business owners, I think there's a huge opportunity for us collectively to start educating our customers, our friends, our family on the fact that they probably will have to pay more for whatever they're looking for, or because businesses can't sustain the pricing models that they've had in place prior to COVID or even during it. So that being the case, if we know that consumers have to change their expectations, it gives us some room to revise our pricing and still provide great services and products to them. But it will probably have to be a bit of a collective approach. It's definitely something we're looking at as a business chamber about how we educate the local community to shop local, but expect a price increase to still support local businesses. So cash flow. I'm not an accountant, but I can tell you that one of the key things that needs to be done, and this is something you can get help from your bookkeepers and from your accountants, is doing a proper cash flow forecast. You need to know how much cash you have to have at the bank to make sure that you've got it when you need it across the next 3 to 6 months. It's not about saying, well, how much of money have I got in the bank today? Okay, great, I can trade today. This is about deciding what the assumptions are I'm basing my figures on. Are they realistic? Have I catered for another lockdown? It is possible. Our government have not promised no lockdowns. We've seen micro lockdowns and snap lockdowns happen overseas. So there's every chance that from time to time, certain industries will have heavier restrictions. Certain businesses will have impacts on them, maybe entire regions. If there's a huge outbreak, might get told you've got to lock down for a couple of weeks. There's always some costs associated with that. One of the biggest costs is reduced income and distrust from our customers about availability of our service or product. So I really do recommend that you take some time to do proper cash flow forecasts. You don't have to be a math wizard for this. You just need to make sure that you're getting the right advice. What we also need to bear in mind is we are literally 3 months off Christmas. So if your business has seasonal impacts and we're just reopening, do you have enough money to cover you for quiet periods? So my business, as an example, we have normally each year we have quiet periods in October, and we have quiet period around the April mark. We're actually quite busy over the Christmas New Year because everyone decides, when they've taken some time off for a week or two, that they don't want to do this anymore. They're going to do their own business. So we get a lot of new business idea inquiry in January. So we know we can take holidays at certain times, but that's all changed. So now we're looking at what will that look like for us? We've just reopened our business centre for the first time in 10 weeks to people who can book meeting rooms and do all that kind of stuff. But are we probably going into a quiet period over Christmas? We don't know. So we have to factor that in, that it is a possibility, and you should too within your business. So I just want to talk a bit of detail about some of the new costs of doing business. There are some key areas of business operations that are going to cost significantly more, and this has to be factored into your pricing models. I would say I could count on one hand as a percentage the number of small businesses who actually have a proper detailed pricing model. Most businesses base their pricing on what the competitor down the street charges, what they think they can get away with, or they kind of go, yeah, okay, that looks right. But do they have a really detailed pricing model? And this is not just sort of the 10 items that your accountant said, look, these are your main operating costs. A detailed pricing model usually has something around 30 to 40 lines in it of infinite detail. Every subscription that you use, the networking that you do, the cost of every single product to produce the main part of your service, and then you've got your variable components. So all the variables of the actual services and products that you provide are separate to those operating costs. So what we need to understand is for every single one of those line items, what might have changed, what could increase. So I can tell you a couple of key things. First of all, straight off the bat, you can expect probably about a 9 to 10% increase in just general operating costs. So this is just your utilities, turning the lights on, mobile phone calls, or little bits and pieces. They're all tiny little bits, but they're all going to start increasing. And the reason why they start increasing is because their supply chain has increased its costs. And as a result, they're passing that on to you. even if it seems little micro amounts. So you should probably bank on base operating costs, minimum 9 to 10%. If you're doing something where you actually have to run an activity or event and it's in a catering or a venue space, then you're looking at somewhere between 10 to 20% increase. We're sitting currently, I've just stepped down and done a budget for our business chamber, and we run something like 22 to 30 events a year. And talking to at least 3 of the venues we normally work with, they've all reported to us that it's probably going to be about a 20% increase. There's nothing they can do. They've got staff issues. They've not operated for 10 weeks. So they can't give us the same kind of deal. So we do have to expect that. So if you're going to run a workshop, for example, as a part of your service delivery model, then you do need to understand now, what are you likely to actually pay for the room hire, for the catering, the tea, the coffee, whatever that might be, and factor that in. And so it is quite significant, because if you're then looking to charge a per head price to attend something, you're not going to be able to keep it at the same rate. So you're going to have to work out what's going to be palatable for the people who are going to participate, but also you're actually still going to make a profit from that. Staff and new purchases and hire equipment, yeah, absolutely guaranteed. If you haven't minimum banked on a 10% increase, then you're definitely going to get caught out by that. And then the other factor, which is entirely dependent on your industry and what it has to do from a compliance point of view, but this includes even things like additional cybersecurity. I don't know about you, but I've certainly had plenty of emails trying to get a hold of my data and to hack my systems. Thankfully, we've got very robust systems in place, but they're getting more and more clever, and they're targeting smaller and smaller businesses. So not only is there the IT cybersecurity components that you need to beef up, you also, if you're collecting any form of data now, and most businesses now fall into this category, it's not just the lawyers and the accountants, because of things like your COVID check-ins and, validation of vaccination certificates and all of that kind of stuff, you're now falling afoul of global data privacy requirements. And as soon as you are collecting sensitive information, then you need to have a higher level of compliance. It could be something as simple as, you need someone to stand at the door checking people's, QR codes. Well, there's a cost to do that. You've got to roster someone on. So the cost of compliance and that systems and process, I think, will be an added impact to all businesses. So working out what does that actually look like for your business now, not just for this initial tight restriction, but if you assumed you're probably going to have to do something similar to it for at least the next year or two, and that you need to factor that in, you definitely want to build that into your pricing model so that you're not going to end up eroding all the margin in your product or service. So this really goes into our product and service profitability. Most businesses don't, on a regular basis, as a small business, review and evaluate whether your current range of products are viable and profitable in the current market. They usually start out with they set a price on it, and they kind of shift it a little bit from year to year, maybe, $10 increase here or 10% increase there. But there isn't necessarily a real process that you conduct. And this is our perfect opportunity to do it. Before you get in and start marketing and trying to bring on more customers for the year ahead, you really want to know whether they're even profitable or not. Because before you start putting the marketing budget in place, you have to decide how much you're willing to pay to get that customer on board. Because if the actual marketing budget itself erodes actually any value you were going to get from delivering that service and making money out of it, then maybe it's actually not the right product or service to be out there selling to that audience. So this is the perfect time as a business to review that. So we want to understand, what's the demand? Has it changed? Are the same customers actually interested in your product or service in the same way it's being delivered anymore? There might be some new streams. A really classic example of that is, whilst we're based in the hills and we have for the last 12 years done business consulting work, and I don't like to travel because I used to drive into town every single day, and the thought of having to sit in a peak hour to do client work really wasn't my cup of tea. I restricted a lot of our consulting work because it was very much face-to-face, one-to-one with business owners to this local area. And if someone wanted to travel and come to me, fantastic. I was happy to do it, but I wasn't going to travel all the way to Sutherland or Wollongong for a client. Because it's now on Zoom, there is huge appetite now for people anywhere to receive our service. This year was the first time we had an international client. So I have a client in New York whom I've never met, of course, face-to-face, referred by another client. So Zoom is not an issue anymore for the way that we deliver service. We've suddenly opened up a whole new marketplace for the way that we may deliver that particular service. But there are some other components which have changed, and we've realised there isn't actually a market for those now anymore. That's very much of an on-demand style offering. So we've had to shift that to more of a on-demand, download an ebook kind of approach, because to try and deliver it like we used to, really, there just isn't any value in that. So now's the time to go through this. It means you might have to delete or park some of your offerings that just right now are not going to get you the right results, that you might need to look at maybe later next year when the market's changed again. But the whole point of this is building a profitable business, because otherwise you're running a charity. And there's nothing wrong with running a charity, but if you're going to run a charity, you really want to make sure you're running a charity. And they're actually for profit as well, because they're designed to make a profit, to reinvest, to help do more and more wonderful things in the community. So if you can see from doing your figures and evaluating this that really you could probably go get a job at McDonald's and earn more with a lot less stress, then you're not doing something right. You do need to rethink what you're providing. Now, what that does require is it requires you letting go, because we get really emotionally wedded to what we create. And at times we have to let some of the things go that can't come with us for the next stage of our journey in our business, and to accept that they were what they were and they were good at the time, but they're just not the right fit for how the business, how the market has evolved. And it's okay. It's not a failure. That was the right season for that product or service. We're now in a new season, and it's okay to do something new, or to allow ourselves to niche, or to move into a different type of customer, because it actually makes more sense in the evolution of our business. So if you've got some pivot products that you created or pivot services that you created, they could be a new line of ongoing business. So they might not just be the temporary fix for the last 6 months, but really understanding, are they genuinely going to be a profitable line for us in the year ahead, requires you doing that evaluation of whether the demand will be there after everyone's allowed to go back to face-to-face. Are there new markets you may want to buy your product, whether that's business to consumer or B2B? And are the pricing models right? Because people may have said, I'm willing to do it now, but you might have to revise that pricing model so that it's a profitable, long-term, great deliverable product or service. So let's talk a little bit about marketing strategies. And you'll note I've done this in a very specific order, because if you get your pricing right and you get your clear product strategy and service strategy right, the next thing you've got to do is work out how you're actually going to sell it. How are you going to get it out there? Now, if you've got that clarity about what are the things you're really going to focus on and that you're looking to make profit from, then you'll be able to allocate a budget to marketing it and know what kind of return on that budget and that activity you're going to need to make it viable to sell those products. This is the area where, of course, Tiz works. So, have a chat to her about the deep aspects of this strategy. But the very first thing is every marketing plan should be aligned to your business plan. But what I find in practice is around about 10% of small businesses actually have a business plan that they are using on a regular basis, that is in fact a living plan, which is not just one you write the first time you start a business and you throw it in a desk drawer, and then sort of every few years you take it out and you blow the dust off it and then decide, oh, actually we've changed the brand name, or we're not doing that anymore. Let's write something new and then put it back in the desk drawer again. Your business plan should be the litmus test by which you test all the ideas that come across your desk. Every wonderful harebrained scheme or alliance or opportunity, you should be going back, say, is this who we are? Does it make sense to where we're going this year? It doesn't have to be a long-winded document. It can be something really simple that's covering some of those things that we've just covered. But before you go into saying, now, how am I going to market? You need to know what it is you're marketing and why, and who you are in the marketplace. So then you can do your strategic marketing plan aligned with those goals as a business. And the most important thing that you need is you need data. So do you have any data whatsoever right now from any of the marketing activities that you've done in the last few years that can give you something to base your assumptions on? Now, it could be you've got Google Analytics turned on to your website. It could be you've dabbled with Facebook ads. Fine, let's have a look at those. What do we know about them? One of the ones which we always miss out on, but actually really important information, is any networking that you've done. So what do we know has been the outcomes of any networking? What kinds of organisations, what kinds of businesses have been interested in working with you? What result are you seeing from the time you spend there? So I can tell you, as an example, if you're participating regularly in a networking group, it can cost you somewhere around $10,000 to $25,000 a year to do networking. Now, what I'm talking about there is not that you're paying literally $10,000 a year to be a part of a network, but your time is money. So when you do your pricing model, it's not just cost of materials and, I've got to pay staff and, turn the lights on. You need to work out how much time do I spend selling, creating and delivering my product or service, and what's my time worth? And setting a price tag on that is really important, because as soon as you start doing that, you're going to really resent wasting your time, because you realise, hang on a minute, I could pay someone else $40 an hour to do that while I'm earning $150 an hour. Why am I doing that task again? Maybe I should outsource that. And that moves you from DIY into thinking as a strategic business owner. It also means that you're going to look at, if I go out and network, what am I trying to get as an outcome? What's my return on investment of that time? If I'm going to walk away from my kids and my husband, at dinner time to go to the local business chamber or a B&I group or a BX group or wherever it might be, or even sit in a lunchtime session, I really want to feel like it was worthwhile, that I learnt something, that I made some new connections. So asking yourself what outcome I'm going to get for the time and money I'm investing is really important, and that should be part of that marketing plan. People are going to want to do business with people. They always have. And so if you think about your year ahead, we've all been stuck at home, in front of computer screens for a really long time. So pushing more emails out to your database for the next 3-4 months probably isn't going to get a huge cut through. It might support it, but the best outcome is probably going to come from connecting with people over cups of coffee, going to networking activities, because people are genuinely want to get out and do business together. So you need to leverage that. So do you have some clear marketing campaigns with actual goals? So it's not about saying, I'm going to create this, marketing campaign, some pretty social media posts that are selling this product. I'm going to kind of target an audience and we'll see how that goes. We actually want to have some very clear goals attached to that. And the reason why is we want to measure how it went, because before we spend more money on it, we really do want to know whether it actually worked or not and whether it achieved the goals you were after. So when we look at what you should think about going in the year ahead when it comes to marketing, you're going to need to know what that budget is, because you've got to include it in your price point so that you're paying for it, and also make sure that it's actually achieving some goals for you in the context of the current marketplace and how it's been changing. So let's talk a little bit about compliance and risk. It doesn't matter what kind of business you are required to comply with public health order rules. And I've had quite a few different conversations with clients. I've got clients across every possible industry you can imagine. And I had a really interesting conversation with one of my clients who's an IT managed service company the other day. And I said, okay, have you done your safe work plan? And they said, we don't need to do one because we just work from home. Basically, everything we do is remote. And we've just got subcontractors working for us. So, I don't have any employees. And I said, well, actually, you're obligated under a duty of care to provide a safe working environment for anyone who works for you, as well as for the customers that you attend. So if you have to go on site, or you have to send a subcontractor of yours on site to fix something or deliver something, you have to have a safe work plan in place. So you may, as a business, have not realised that because you will interact with other people in some way, even if you're a one-man band and you go to a networking event, you have to think about, what does that actually mean? What are the orders that apply to us? What are the rules that I have to put in place? If I work in collaboration with other partner organisations to deliver services, what have I got to know about them, and what have they got to know about me to make sure that we're all complying? Because we don't want to fall afoul of fines and rules, but also it's about making sure we protect people and provide a safe working environment. Now, I raise this because insurance companies are not covering you for this. They have pulled out of a lot of their insurance policies anything to cover you around COVID issues and anything that's considered high risk. They've taken the opportunity over the COVID period to basically remove everything they possibly can that protects you or defends you from some of these risks. So if you've developed something new or pivoted a product, or you're thinking about doing something new as a service going into this new year, you need to go back to your insurance policies and check you're actually covered for those activities. And if you're not, make sure that it's listed and that it's clear that those things need to be covered. And if it is and they're not going to cover you anymore going into renewal, then you need to consider, am I going to open myself up to a risk I'm not willing to take, where I could lose my house by delivering this particular service or product? The other thing that you have to look at is the contracts. So many people, if they've had any kind of terms and conditions created or contracts drawn up, they've done it a couple of years ago, and of course your services and products are different now. So you might need to go back and revise those. We usually suggest you look at them at least every 12 months, or anytime you're going to do something new as a product or service offering, just to check, is it actually covering these instances? And is it robust enough to make sure that I can ask for payment within 7 days, for example, or whether I've just left it, loose-ended on our invoicing and on our terms and conditions. From a cyber point of view, if you've gone and spent a bit of time developing a nice new website over the last little while to launch some new products or work on your business that way, you do need to make sure that you've got the right disclaimers on your emails and on your website. So if you don't have that, look into that, because especially if you're collecting anyone's information on a contact form or anything else like that, you definitely need to make sure you've got the right information on your website. And that might be something you just need to talk to a commercial lawyer about to make sure you've got the right wording. So making sure that the risks and the compliance aspects of what business is going to look like for you in the year ahead is actually covered, so that it doesn't stall or, basically undermine your business operations. That's about saying, are there people risks and are there non-people risks? So most businesses, when they start and as they operate, and entrepreneurs, we're optimistic. That's by nature, we have to be, because otherwise we probably wouldn't bother doing this. We'd never survive. So the problem with being really optimistic as an entrepreneur is we don't often look at, well, what could go wrong? So the number one question to ask yourself when you're embarking on anything at the moment is to say, okay, this is great. We've created this and I think this has got legs. Let's look at how we're going to market it. But before we do that, let's just ask ourselves, what could go wrong? And have we covered ourselves for the what could we go wrong aspect? And some of it might just be, oh, actually, what we need to do is we actually just need to communicate that to our customer so that we mitigate that problem, or we make the assumption they're not going to read that term and condition. Maybe we just need to get them to tick a box to say they've confirmed that they agree with what we're proposing to do. Now, if you haven't, as an organisation, invested in having a professional IT managed service provider do your backups, your patching, your implementation of your cybersecurity and your data privacy, I would highly recommend this. It is not something you can DIY effectively. And I cannot tell you how many clients we've seen over the last 12 months who are micro businesses who you would never think would be targeted by ransomware, by phishing attacks, by any number of things, that have been caught out, either them or a staff member or someone who's just been tired and clicked on the wrong thing and have essentially shut down their operations or damaged their reputation as a result. So it's not expensive, but it is absolutely essential. And even just to the point where if we go back and look at the risks and say what could halt the delivery effectively of your service? Well, if you can't access your computer, if you can't get to your customer database, if you can't see what orders you've got for the day or process whatever needs to be processed at the till for the day, how will that impact you? If you have the ability to pick a phone up and say to an IT person, we've got an issue, can you sort it out? Or can you at least restore the backup so I can see where we were at yesterday instead of losing an entire week's worth of work? That is worth its weight in gold to you. And it really isn't an expensive process. But if we put that amount into our pricing model, then we'll already have paid for it in what we're doing every day. So please do consider that seriously. And I've literally had a phone call with the police cybercrime unit yesterday, and they are genuinely concerned holistically across Australia at the number of micro and small businesses who are getting hit with this at the moment. So in addition to that is, are you actually recording all your financials correctly? This is really, really important, because if you've applied for any kind of grants, JobSaver, JobKeeper, whatever it might be, it all goes through into the tax office. So most accountants would probably be able to tell you that the ATO can access any financial records they like, to the point where they can monitor bank accounts. And I've spoken to people at large, banks like your ANZ and Westpac and people like that, where they've said if they want to detect fraud of any kind or people who aren't doing the right thing, they have no issues in doing it. There's nothing to stop them. And they don't, even if you're taking cash, they can actually see by your spending habits and by other mechanisms whether it's likely that you're avoiding tax. So make sure that your financial records are being done correctly, because at some point they will come back and ask you to prove that you're entitled to whatever it is you've claimed. Or more importantly, what we saw last year was that some businesses who were operating on cash and didn't have their financial records in place properly were not able to access grants and support as a result. And that was really quite sad, because they couldn't prove on their financials they're entitled. And, I kind of stand and go, well, the rest of us have kind of done the right thing. So there you go. But just as a clue, make sure you take the time to get it right. And if you don't really know what you're doing in regard to that, if that's not your forte, then get in touch with a local bookkeeper or accountant service. A lot of them will actually do some training for you to make sure that you're using your bookkeeping system properly. Even if you're DIYing it, it's totally fine just to get some training and clues from them. You don't have to fully outsource it if you don't have the money to do that. But as long as you know that you're doing it right and you get a little bit of training on it, that's enough to get you through. And also it'll help you with your budgeting process as well. So let's talk a little bit about people management. The number one question that I get asked as in my role with the Business Chamber is, how are we supposed to handle things if one of our staff decide that they do not want to be vaccinated? What can I do? What can't I do? What's my obligations? The reality is that in a month's time, when they open up all the restrictions again, that question will become irrelevant to a degree, because we will have to allow anyone we like in our business. And by the time all the doors are open over the next month, the chance of spread of a virus is incredibly high. You only have to look at reports from overseas to know that that is likely to happen. People will get sick. So therefore, the real question we should be asking ourselves when we think about planning ahead for the year and reopening is how your business is going to keep operating and delivering when you or your staff member gets ill. Because it may be more of a when than an if. And if that's the case, what's your plan? What's your disaster recovery plan to make sure that you're going to keep still delivering services, you're going to keep selling, you're going to keep providing what you need to provide, as well as maybe having to be at home in isolation or taking some time off to recover. If you have a staff member who's in that situation, what's your backup plan? Could you operate without them, or will you need to look at being able to source really quickly another skilled resource to come in, or a rostering change? We should assume, whether there's a pandemic or not, that we need always to have some form of disaster recovery backup plan in our business and what it might cost us to do that. And that we, particularly now for the next 12 months or so, we should factor that cost into our business model. If we don't have to use it, Well, fantastic. But the likelihood is we probably will. Are people in your business in the right roles at the moment? So we may have, over the last year or two, got everyone doing whatever it is that they had to do to keep that business going. So everyone played different roles, they threw different hats on, or you might have been putting every single hat on in the business and feel ill-equipped in some areas to be the right person to actually do that part of the job. What that means is you might need to look at training, you might need to look at retraining, you might need to look at delegation to be more productive, to get a better result from a profitability. And that then comes back to, again, that question of what's your time worth? If you're a single person operator and you are doing absolutely everything, is that actually the most effective and efficient way to run your business? Or are you better off offloading aspects of your administration to an admin person for 5 to 10 hours a week to free you up to sell on a couple more clients that covers that, but also gets you more productive and able to grow where you want to grow this year? When it comes to what the rules are, they're continuously changing, and they will continuously change. You'll probably get all of about a day or a week's notice on when there are microscopic changes. Personally, I'm exhausted from having to read every new thing that comes out every week or every couple of days and trying to work out, what does that mean for my business? So then being able to translate that to your staff and any operational changes is going to take time. And every time there's some level of uncertainty or unrest, we should probably expect that there's going to be impact on us from a mental health point of view and a productivity point of view, but it's certainly going to be the same for our staff. So we should be trying to factor that in and thinking through, what does that look like in our service delivery model for the year ahead? If we assume that every few weeks we might have to cannibalise some new changes or make some adjustments, what's going to be our process of communicating, training, and making sure that everything moves forward instead of stops every time there's some form of change? I think we should factor in, what if there was a lockdown, again, what might that look like in regard to our people, and being able to keep them on board, keep them positive, and what might be your plan to keep everyone still productive in that. We've been through two, we probably expect at least another one or two sometime over the next couple of years, even if they're really short and snap periods. So I've mentioned mental health there. I think this is a really, really important aspect of your opening plan for the year ahead. I have not come across any small business in the last 2 years who actually has a plan on how to support your own mental health. Most of them have put their oxygen mask on their staff or their customers, but haven't actually stopped properly to think about how they're looking after themselves. Now, the adage of the airplane where you're told put your oxygen mask on yourself first so you can help others, often goes against the grain, because we're there to help, and most businesses are there to help, and they're genuinely focused on their customers and their teams, and that's a good thing. But this is a marathon, not a sprint that we're in. So I am highly recommending that you think about how you're going to, on a day-to-day and a weekly basis, proactively plan to look after your mental health, putting that oxygen mask on yourself so that you are capable of functioning well to then serve your customers and your staff in this. The second part of that is, sadly, we as businesses will probably start seeing, and I've already seen a lot of it so far, that we're going to have to handle aggressive, disappointed, or abusive customers. Now, where does that come from? If we're talking about a retail environment, it comes from a rights-driven perspective. I believe it's my right to do what I want, go where I want, and get what I want, irrespective of the 16-year-old who's standing by the counter, whose job is being told to QR code when someone comes in and they know nothing more. But I don't think that's actually where we're going to see the real strain here. What we're going to see across all kinds of businesses is people who are struggling with their own mental health, who are tired, who are now short-fused, who are still, I suppose, struggling from the repercussions of what we've just faced over the last couple of years, whose response to you when you have a delay in what you're providing, or you want to increase your price, or have, not shown up to a meeting on time for whatever reason is not going to be as pleasant as it was previously. So I think we should really think about how we train ourselves and our teams on managing conflict, on having conversations where we know that it's possible that the other people are under strain. It could come down to even just asking someone to do something and then getting a curt response via email or voicemail and thinking, what was that about? I don't think I was asking very much. I was just following something up, not taking it personally, recognizing this is where people are at right now. But having a plan on how to address that and manage it is really important because it'll protect you and it'll protect your staff, which keeps your business running and being productive. And taking the front foot, I think, is really important because we want to see you guys have enjoyable businesses, to have businesses that you are growing and you're productive in, but you have to look after yourself as a person in this as well because you are the business in a lot of cases. So I thought we'd just touch on those things. And as I mentioned, we've got a checklist which goes into each of those different categories, more questions for you to think about and drill down. I'm just going to stop sharing for a minute and just see if anyone has any questions they want to ask about anything related to reopening your business.
Thanks, Kerrie. I did drop that checklist in the chat box if anyone saw it, but again, I will send it out in an email after this. Does anyone have any questions? I've written down a couple.
Yep.
Go, Carmen.
Yep. What would a wellness program look like in a small business? What would you recommend?
I think what we have to bear in mind is that people are probably going to take longer to do things than they normally would, and that includes you. And that is because mainly it's because of exhaustion. And it's information overload. It's the sitting in front of Zoom, and computer screens for longer periods of time and not moving around and getting different stimulation. So the very first thing that I would suggest is looking at how people are pacing themselves through their workload, because especially going back and reopening, you can't just go back and say, right, full steam ahead, it's all back to normal, we pile the pressure on. What you're going to do is when that occurs, you're going to have a big absentee rate. You're actually going to say, I've got to take a day off. I can't handle this, or I'm not coping, and therefore they feel a sense of failure, and then they start isolating themselves and not communicating. So communication regularly, the check-in. How are we going today? How are you handling this? You're now commuting back and forward there's a lot more people out there. How are you feeling about that? Kids are going back to school. Okay, so what does that look like? There's a care factor of allowing people to talk about how are you tracking? How are you managing it proactively? And then there's also acknowledgement that we're probably going to take a little bit longer to do things and be less productive because we're trying to get back into routines that we haven't got into before. So definitely getting back into routines slowly but surely, but without piling it on. Proactive, regular communication and an expectation that's a little bit lower than what we normally would do. And that's why the communication with the customers is so important. Because if we're still sticking to, we're going to turn this around in 24 hours for you, but we know that our own team is struggling to be as productive, then you might start giving yourself a bit more space to say, we're going to turn this around in 48 hours for you. Is that okay? Because we just need a little bit of extra time to be able to not be so overloaded. The other thing around wellness is, I would say, monitoring how much screen time you have, really reducing how much time you've got sitting in front of a computer, deliberately getting outside and just getting a bit of a break. A lot of us have sat there in front of 6 hours of Zoom a day. I know I have. And I'm at the physio twice a week for my shoulders as a result. I've kept them in, the lifestyle to which they've become accustomed. But that's not sustainable. 6 months of that and really 2 years of it physically is not working. So I'm having to force myself to actually put in my diary break times instead of going from meeting to meeting to meeting, because that was nice and efficient and I wasn't able to go anywhere. So, what did it matter? But that's not sustainable in the long term.
Kerrie, on that whole managing conflict, because I agree, I feel like there's going to be a massive expansion of that, especially like initially. do you know of anyone, or do you know of any program, or do you know of anyone that actually looks at that, or can specifically around COVID, or
There's probably two ways I would look at this. One, when you're talking about being able to de-escalate conversations effectively. There's actually a guy I've come across within our business chamber who is a professional in this space, and he runs training. He's actually put a blog on with a little link to a podcast that he's done recently, which is available, which I can send you as a link, which you can share around. And that's when you're getting some more towards the training end of things. When we're talking about the just general conflict resolution and to, I suppose, avoid it in the first place from actually happening, what that really looks like is to begin by reducing our expectations on ourselves from being unrealistic. So often what we think the customer is going to expect from us is actually not even what the customer expects from us. It's us putting a lot more pressure on ourselves than we need to out of perfectionism and wanting to do an excellent job. But when we do that, quite often we actually set ourselves up for failure, because we will do things like flippantly say, no problem, I'll get those notes to you today, or I'll send you an email by the end of the day. Well, I'm about to sit in 4 hours of meetings. When am I going to send that email? And I've got 15 other things on my desk. Okay, I've just set myself up for failure. But my customer wasn't even expecting me to do that. They only expect it now because I've just told them that's what I was going to do. So actually giving yourself permission to create space and set a different expectation, first of all, changes the conflict discussion. Now, in some cases, you can't do that because they have tight turnarounds, they have deadlines to meet. So then it is about understanding what's their real need, what absolutely needs to happen. If we're able to provide this to you by this time, because we're just helping another customer with a major problem or an issue or whatever it might be, would that be okay? If not, and it's absolutely drop everything, do it because it's a major emergency, then sometimes that means getting on the phone to the other customer and saying, look, we've actually got a major customer emergency. We need to get them up and running in the next 3 hours. Would you mind if I just park that or change that meeting or send you those notes tomorrow instead? Now, I would say probably 99% of the time, customers have no issues with that, because they want you to treat them in the same way that you're treating that other customer, that if they have an emergency, that you're going to do it. So I think first thing first, don't set yourself up for failure. That's one way to avoid this. Secondly, if we know that we're going to have the kinds of customers who have got unrealistic expectations or are very rights-driven and could become an issue, proactive communication with them about the position you're in. And the wonderful thing about public health orders and about legislation and what the government puts out is, in some cases, I've actually got a hairdresser who I was talking to the other day who said, I've actually got a client who's not double vaxxed and has no intention to be, and she sent me a message saying, okay, when can you fit me in? And I've said, well, I thought you said you weren't going to get double vaxxed. Yeah, but you'll get me in anyway. Well, I could lose my whole business if I do that. And every other customer. No, I can't do that, but I don't want to be rude to her. How do I handle that? So I said to her, well, there's a really simple way to address this. You don't need to get into an argument about vax and unvax. That's their personal choice. That's fine. But you have legal obligations as a business. So send her a link to the public health order and simply say, unfortunately, under the current public health order, I'm not able to have you here legally, or I face a significant fine and so do you. So I imagine you understand that at this point I can't provide that service to you. Is that customer going to be happy? No, they're not, but you don't want to get into an argument about something you don't need to get in an argument about.
Yeah. Which is exactly what you can do up until the 1st of December.
Well, actually it is, and this is where, as a business, it's really important to take the time to inform yourself about what your rights as a business are. So understanding that you have a right to refuse customers in your business based on a number of different things, and one of them is safety. So if your safe work plan under public safety mitigation process requires that the only way that you feel that you can protect your staff and the rest of your customers is to refuse certain types of service, then on reasonable grounds, you can discriminate. So you have to look at, and this is where if you're in an area where, particularly if you're public facing, people walking into your building, take the time to understand what the rules are, because it's different. There's fair work, and fair work is employment. But then you've got your essentially the laws which provide protection to consumers and to protection to businesses. So the combination of those two can be used to decide what you believe you're willing to do. So I can tell you right now, if someone walks into my business, if I was going to get essentially what we thought was going to happen a month ago was that if they reopened us on the 1st of December for anyone, vaxxed or unvaxxed, but I would have a requirement on my business centre that if there was an instance of COVID discovered in my business centre, I would be required to close my doors for 7 to 14 days. Everyone who's a tenant here would have to close their business for that period of time as a close contact. I would have to deep clean this office, which would be an expense of somewhere between $1,500 to $3,000. There's a whole bunch of things that would happen as a result of that. Now, the actual costs of doing that far outweigh the handful of people who might come to my business who were not double vaccinated, who have a higher transmission rate. So I'm allowed as a business to choose to refuse service to a customer where it would essentially undermine my safe work environment mitigation. So I would recommend for every business who's got that as an issue, go and have a look to see what you're going to be required to do, which would highly impact your business and its employees and customers and the costs, and then check out what the laws are around that to decide what you can and can't actually do.
Okay. So yeah, if you could send that link to that blog, I can add that to the email.
Yeah, I will.
Anyone else have any other questions? Because I've got a couple of others. So I was going to ask about, when you talked about T's and C's, that actually rang an alarm bell in my head. Because like you said, a lot of us have either don't have them or we did them ages ago. And so much has changed. So is there like somewhere where we can go? Is there like a templated or a standard, or because I know if going to a lawyer or somebody to get that done can be quite costly to get T's and C's done. Is there somewhere where we can go to get T's and C's, like a generic or a template?
Yes and no. It is so dependent on the nature of your business that you can go to places like LawPath and some of the sort of templated legal agreement type of service providers who will have downloadable standardized versions, but you still have to consider what are the risks. So the very starting point for any kind of contract terms and conditions is asking yourself the what could go wrong question. What is the information I'm actually trying to cover off here as a term and condition? So the standard stuff is payment. When do I expect people to pay me and on what basis? If it's, a product, okay, will they be able to return it? Can they refund it? If I'm booking a meeting room, am I allowed to refund and under what conditions will that be done? So when you look at your terms and conditions, you have to consider to yourself, what is going to be my process to actually administer this? Because you might say, oh, okay, well, if in our centre here you book a meeting room and you decide to cancel it the day before, are we going to give a full refund? Well, if I do that, then my problem is that nobody else would have booked that room, so I would have lost money, and so that actually penalises me. And I've still got to actually do the work administering to pull it out of the system and fiddle around. So it actually costs me money if someone does that. So at the very least, we've got to cover our costs. So actually, let's do a 50% refund if it's within 24 to 48 hours, because then it's reasonable, but I'm also covering myself here. So you have to look at, from a terms and conditions, what's practical, what's actually administrable, and what's defendable. Because if a term and condition is there, and someone breaks the rule, how do you actually defend that, especially if it's got to go to court or it's got to go to a lawyer? We don't recommend that people dummy up their own T's and C's and contracts. It doesn't have to be War and Peace in saying that. My consulting service agreement is one page. And that's a straightforward terms and conditions of working with us. So it doesn't have to be a big, long document. And in most cases, if you're talking about a pretty straightforward term and condition of service, if you're paying more than a few $100s with a lawyer, you're probably overpaying for it anyway, because they're usually going off the basis of most of it's standard with some differentiator for yours. But if you're just kind of downloading something off the internet or copying it from someone else's business, you've really got a high chance that it won't be defendable or enforceable, in which case you might as well not have even done it in the first place.
So, and I believe there are probably some lawyers that specialise in terms and conditions. Could you go to any lawyer? Or
you really do need to talk to a commercial lawyer, because they're looking at business terms and conditions. The other thing you have to consider is if you are selling product, you have to consider, well, first of all, I may need product insurance, not just public liability insurance. But also what I may need is a product lawyer, because that's a different type of process to general commercial law. If you're talking about protecting intellectual property, so, you've got a method, a system, a document of some kind, you need to be talking to an intellectual property lawyer, and that includes IT systems. So if you're partnering up to create an app, for example, and you're going to get an IT company to do the design or code it for you, but you've got the business smarts, you need an IP lawyer, someone who's going to make sure that you retain the intellectual property. That's not a standard commercial lawyer, although many IP lawyers also do general commercial work. There's actually a good one out your way who I do a lot of referral to, is Mitchell Law, Claire Louise Mitchell. Is a very good IP lawyer, a woman business owner, and does both commercial and intellectual property, and it specialises in IT as well.
Cool. I'd also, when you were talking about insurances and risk and stuff like that, I would also think finding a really good broker who actually knows a lot about insurance to help you understand. Because here's a story, ladies. My business model years ago was quite different to what it was now, and I did a lot of events. So I had public liability insurance, and then I changed my business model, and it's predominantly marketing consulting now, and outsourced marketing, and my broker, who I'd spoken to and explained this, who knew that my business model had changed, never said anything to me about changing or needing different insurance, which I realised I didn't need the public liability so much, but what I needed is the indemnity insurance.
Yeah, I unfortunately come across frequently in my industry, in the consulting space, a lot of coaches who don't have professional indemnity insurance. Now, in some cases, they don't need it. But as soon as you start giving advice on which someone will rely to be able to do their business or their, make decisions on, especially when we're talking about financial implications, then you need professional indemnity, because they are relying on your advice. So if you think that you're even remotely straying into something where they're making decisions on the basis of what you are telling them, then you absolutely need it. And it's crazy how many people I come across who actually do that, who don't have those insurances when we ask about it. Your public liability, your professional indemnity, your product insurance, we do see some businesses that go from providing service, so trade service, and then they decide to productize something. And they don't realise that if you're going to productize it, you're now selling a product. So you've changed your model of operation. The other thing to bear in mind is that if anything you do has risk associated with it, so you're traveling, you're adventuring, whatever that might look like as a part of your business model, then absolutely you have to make sure that your coverage will provide cover for you. And that includes if you have staff running around doing deliveries now. So if you've gone from a retail business where people come to you and now you're delivering out to them. So catering business is a classic example of this, where you've had restaurants and cafes who decide now they're going to deliver to people's homes, haven't changed their insurance policies. They've changed their risk profile, but they haven't actually changed their insurance to cover getting on the road and dropping stuff at people's houses.
And would that be similar to, say, someone like Louise who does IT? I would imagine, Louise, you would have staff that goes to someone's office to install, implement, do whatever they do. I mean, you'd need insurance to cover that too, right?
Oh, in Louise's cases, she'd have a barrage of insurances because we're talking about making sure people's systems are operating, and
well, that too, yes.
Yeah, there's a whole bunch of stuff there, and that's business continuity and a whole bunch of things. So, and that can be also an issue. So, if you think about, is there a chance that my business could stop operating because of an issue, whether it's COVID or an accident or whatever that might be? How much of an impact will that have on our business financials? Well, then you may need a business continuity insurance. If you are someone who has highly vulnerable data, so if you're an accounting firm and you don't have cyber insurance, you really need to look at this, because accounting firms are targeted because they can get to those clients. It's a reputational issue. Ransomware is a big issue for accounting and legal practices. So the cyber insurance helps you to at least pay the ransom and fight that and get reputation restored. The other one, which is often missed out, and I've raised this a few times with small businesses, is key man insurance. So key man insurance allows you, if something happens to you, and this comes back to what happens if you get sick, or let's say somebody dies, how are you going to keep that business going? And if it's dependent on you to deliver and it's a significant source of income, or you have major commitments and contracts, could you get someone else in to cover you? Could you bring someone in to manage the business, keep the operations going, to pick the phone up and make the sales, so at least you can keep your crew on the road? Keyman Insurance pays for you to employ someone to take that role on for that period of time whilst you are sick, incapacitated, or, if you're trying to just work through an estate. And it's something small businesses, because they organically grow over time, get to a point where they don't realise that there is quite a high dependence, and partnerships often look at keyman insurance, because if one partner is incapacitated or dies, all of a sudden the other partner has to take everything over, or has to deal with those problems. So if you don't know about keyman insurance, I would look into it, because it's not a cheap thing, but it's also something which could actually be factored into your pricing model, so that you can ensure that you've got those risks covered in your business for the years ahead.
Does anyone have any other questions? Look, thank you, Kerrie. This has been great. Lots of information to absorb there. So I'm kind of glad we've recorded this.
Well, the whole point of what we've just covered here, I know there's lots of questions, and a lot of them are sort of risky type questions. And the reason for that is because if we don't have answers to these questions, and we don't feel comfortable that we've covered all these things, being able to confidently grow and know what you're going to need to invest in your business, and how you're going to need to price, and what you're going to sell to actually make a profit for the year ahead, becomes quite difficult. And all of a sudden you're going to trip up over some of these things you haven't thought about, and it's going to stop you from growing. It's going to stop you from being profitable, or it's going to make you feel really frustrated because you realise, I'm not making any money out of this. I'm doing a lot of work, but I'm not actually making any money. And that's not enjoyable. That's not a fun business to run.
No, it isn't. But thank you again. This is great. And I encourage all of you to go and stalk Kerrie on LinkedIn and connect with her on LinkedIn. And I'm sure, feel free to reach out with any other questions you might have for her. But I will definitely send a link to this recording, but also I'll resend the checklist for you guys to look at. And then I'll maybe send a link to that podcast Kerrie was talking about as well. If not later today, possibly tomorrow. I won't set myself up.
Well, I won't be sending you the link today to the podcast, because I've got another 3 meetings. So it won't be till tomorrow that you're going to.
So I'll be emailing you all tomorrow. All right. So look, that's it. I might just stop recording.